Frozen to the bone, there's darkness in your soul, your cold, cold heart.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Trek Cannon's Midnight Edition. So today I'm going to be talking about a fixed point in time, one of a couple that comes immediately to mind. One that you guys will be very familiar with is Edith Keeler from the episode City on the Edge of Forever from the original series. Next person, and a little bit less known, will be the man Gabriel Bale from the Deep Space Nine episode Past Tense 1 and 2, Season 3, episodes 11 and 12. So, let's talk a little bit about Gabriel Bale and the Bale Riots. Now, Gabriel Bale was born April 24th, 1987 in America. They don't tell exactly which state he was born in, but we know that somewhere along the lines of his life, he finds himself in San Francisco, California in 2024. Going a little bit about what we know of Gabriel Bale from his short appearance in the episode, we know that he was the type of individual that cared for the weaker type of individual. He didn't like bullies. He was a good fighter, all right? He was the type of individual that seemed like he would defend the lesser of us, okay? In essence, he seemed like he had a great character about him. Now, sometime during the year 2024, which is 2 years away from current events, wow, how time flies, Gabriel Bale finds himself within District A of the Sanctuary District in San Francisco, California, USA. All right, it's a roughly 20 square block sanctuary facility that was set up for the homeless originally. All right, and the population is unknown. Known as sanctuary districts, these places not only popped up in California, but all through the Americas and around the globe. One of the places that was of note in the episode was Europe, where their sanctuaries were experiencing social unrest, which, because it was televised, was something that the citizens of the Americas was able to look at and ridicule and basically say, hey, our sanctuary cities aren't like that. You know, we have great sanctuary cities. These our sanctuary cities are humane. Look at those people over there, which is typically something that people in America tend to do. So, how did we end up getting to the situation of the sanctuary districts and where Gabriel Bale finds himself? Star Trek has always held a mirror to the social systems within our culture. And one of the great things about Star Trek is that it has always been almost prophetic in its ability to not only predict technological advancements and shortcomings, but social advancements and shortcomings. So, how does this relate to what we're talking about today? One need only look at the current homeless situation in the same state that the Bale Riots take place in the Star Trek canonical universe. In California, by what I could find in doing research for this particular video, at least 70% of the population of California is considered homeless or unable to afford housing for various different reasons. Some of those reasons include cost of living increases that don't reflect in a person's pay or particular raises annually. Another reason could be the fact that a person doesn't have the particular income to afford the housing, even the ones that are deemed affordable in the California area. The people who fall into the homeless category don't only stop with people who are limited monetarily. These people also include people who have mental deficiencies or social issues, people who can't, because of handicaps or physical disabilities or mental disabilities are unable to exist in a structured professional environment or in society as a whole. These people often find themselves due to lack of funding for clinics and hospitals and lack of room and resources for these very same facilities. These people find themselves also out on the street, okay, unable to support themselves. Also, people who have been released from jail due to overcrowding, things of that nature. All of these people find themselves without homes or a place to stay out on the streets. And with 70% of the population, you can see how the efforts of shelters and churches and facilities like this can be overrun very quickly. In the process of these events, we find that the people who are homeless tend to congregate together or find places that they can lay their head or exist without ridicule or assault from passerby. The thing is that even now, places like these, people are passing laws to prohibit homeless people from occupying these same particular areas. Wherever more and more places that these people can go to survive or to just simply lay their head dwindling, they find themselves making their own tent cities or own small communities where they can feel in their own way safe and keep their belongings and their livelihood and feel the little bit of humanity that they have left being stripped from view of the normal citizens. And even that has become a problem. Just this year in California, 1,200 encampments that we just referenced were torn down and demolished, and these people were forcibly relocated. Efforts by the state legislature and state governor are trying to put into place laws that would eliminate from view the homeless issue. Bills like the Care Court Bill and the California Comeback Plan, which are bills that have been announced and I believe passed in California, which are designed to eliminate from view the homeless issue and to set aside funding for buildings and structures that would house these people, and they call them sanctioned camps. These sanctioned camps have been popping up throughout America, one of the other places being Missouri. Like the beginnings of the sanctuary districts that we see in this particular episode of Deep Space Nine, they had a great and generous genesis. All right. They were designed to help people get jobs, create help, and provide social services for these homeless people to get them not only off the street and provide them a safe place to stay, a secure location to stay, but get them trained and get them into a job placement system to whereas it'll be a transition off the streets and into the job market. I know that even with the creation of these sanctioned camps, LA in particular created a homeless authority specifically designed to police the homeless. But even as we're experiencing now, because just as stated, this story takes place 2 years in the future from current dates. Even as people are getting laid off now by the thousands from all these various companies, we find that funding and support for even almost the essential of items and things is being cut. And this is one of the things that District A, as well as all of the other districts, were experiencing. Everyone has had the opportunity to experience the American DMV. All right, everybody's been to the DMV or everybody's been to a place where you go and you get snaps or something like that and had to go through sitting in front of a counselor who seemed like they lacked empathy. They were very apathetic. Okay, and that's even in these times. So the lack of funding, the lack of getting paid, the lack, I mean, the the abundance of hours. These things create stresses in people. All right. And it forms a certain type of apathy in a lot of cases with people. And this is something that these social workers were starting to experience. In these cases, the social workers weren't taking proper censuses. They were letting people fall into and disappear into the system. So, although the districts had a certain amount of people that they can hold, um, we find in the episode and from what we can see going on that these places were far different as advertised. One of the true things that I've found about society is their ability to look the other way when it comes to things that don't concern them or that makes them feel uncomfortable. Homeless people fall into this category. People with mental illnesses or disabilities fall into this category. People with social uh, incongruities fall into this category. We take a look at the reasons that these laws are being passed in these particular areas, especially in California, was because a lot of the business owners and a lot of the property owners and a lot of the parents and these people were feeling uncomfortable about seeing homeless people around on their property in their area. They started to relate this to theft and assault and drug addiction and drugs, period. All right. They considered it nasty and unsanitary, and that violent and views about it being violent started to ensue. They started to get away from the understanding that these people were either down on their luck because they didn't have the money to pay for a place, that these people either had some type of mental disability, okay, but these were people nonetheless, they needed help. And even in today's society, people have begun to see this who experience this on a daily basis, begin to develop a shield, a form of apathy, to whereas they try to distance viewing this. They try to distance themselves from this. They try to distance themselves from that experience, this particular reality, to make themselves feel better. And that's what we began to see in the episode. These particular sanctuaries, although started off with the greatest of intentions, what is the only, you put all of these people in a certain area and you provide housing for them, but they are still able to exit that area and intermingle with people who don't want to have that particular interaction. These people are able to drive past and still look down off the freeway and see the tent cities and all of these homeless people. They are still able to then experience that as part of their reality. So the next step was to build walls around these particular facilities, which is something that they did in the episode. Each of these districts was surrounded by a wall and one way to check in and check out. They also had their own legal authority that would police the area. Eventually, because the people in the districts weren't allowed to use terminals unless it had something to do with job searching or interacting with their profile to set up with the social workers of the sanctuary. There were never records posted about the sanctuary individuals on the planetary computer network or their version of the internet. The residents also had no other means of contacting or putting or interacting with the planetary computer network, which is a service all of the other, or please excuse me, which is a service that all of the other citizens who had money were able to access. Eventually, with this lack of information or this blackout of information on the districts and them being walled and out of sight, the citizens of America, and by extension, the citizens around the world, began to view the things going on in sanctuaries and even sanctuaries themselves as nothing more than rumors. They had the out of sight, out of mind persona, which is something that we can all relate to. As such, one of the things that I talked about was the overcrowded issue of the sanctuary districts. People who are familiar with the 60s, 70s, and 80s of places called projects will be very familiar with the thing that I'm about to explain. Now, in the from the math that I could come up with, there can be roughly 1,400 people per 1 square block. Now, District A was 20 square blocks. So if I do the math, that's about 28,000 individuals for a 20 square block radius. Now, it's stated in the episode that the sanctuary holds 10,000 individuals. But if we take a look at the episode as Cisco and Bashir are walking through the streets, you see that there are people sleeping and occupying the streets, people sleeping and occupying on the fire escapes, on the balconies, on the porches, in the gutters, on the roofs, in every apartment building, in all the hallways in the apartment building, in in the alleyways and gangways. Every place that you've seen where you can lay, there was usually a person occupying that space. So although they say 10,000 in the episode, I rather believe I go on the low end of my estimate of 28,000 people which occupied District A. Now, as I was relating to the projects, we know that in the projects, because of the close proximity, the lack of resources, the lack of opportunity, even the things that would result as because of that, the experiments that led to the building of the projects dictated as such, which is why they built them and why they're called projects. But that's a very different story. Now, just like in that particular experiment, which took place many years ago, and the next experiment, which was provided to African Americans in urban areas in the, like I said, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which they performed. All right. This same outcome came with the districts. It was this overpopulation, lack of resources, lack of job opportunities. All right. This created its own culture inside that was basically violent and people feeding off one another. This ended up creating three distinct factions within the districts, and they were giving the name or the slang names Dems, Gimmies, and Ghosts. And let's talk a little bit about each. The Dems were the mentally ill. They had psychological ailments. Some had mental illnesses that were treatable, but they couldn't get the resources or the medicine available even at that time due to a lack of money. All right, these people suffer from things like schizophrenia, things of that nature. Then you had the gimmies, or which was short for give me work. These were the people who had some type of training, some type of education, but found themselves in between jobs or looking to fill another job. As a result, they couldn't pay their rent, found themselves on the street, and found themselves in the sanctuary. And then you have the ghosts. These are the people who create the violence and the mayhem, murders, robbery, feeding off other individuals in a sanctuary, stealing, taking food ration cards, things of that nature. These are the individuals that cause the chaos in the districts. Now, there's two ways of looking at the Bell riots. What happened before the intervention of Cisco and his team, and what happened as a result of Cisco and his team. In either case, let's talk about the characters or the players that's majorly involved in this particular story of the Bell riots. You have Michael Webb and Bitter Coleridge, a gimme and a ghost, respectively. You have Bernardo Calvera and Van, housing authority agents or cops. You have Chris Briner of Channel 90, but we'll get into him in a moment. You have Lee, the beautiful social worker. We also have Detective Preston, which is the negotiator on the scene. And of course, you have Gabriel Bell. So Let's talk about the Bell riots, how they occurred chronologically based on based on historical events. On the night of September 1st, a dam and a security guard got into a fight, and it resulted in the Dems and the Ghosts taking the security guard's weapons and distributing them throughout District A and holding 6 hostages in a processing facility. September 2nd, 2024, negotiations began between the hostage takers and Detective Preston. Now, what they don't specify is if uh, Gabriel Bell was heading the negotiations or part of the negotiations, or if it stayed Michael Webb or even Mr. Biddle himself. We do know that either during the negotiations or as a result of improper negotiations, something broke down which caused the governor to activate the National Guard and on September 3rd send them in to District A to forcefully secure the district. Now, one could say that this is the actual historical events of what took place during the Bell riots of 2024. But because of temporal theory, we can't say which one is actual, but can we? On August 30th, 2024, Captain Benjamin Sisko, Dr. Julian Bashir, and Commander Jadzia Dax appear in California due to a weird transporter accident. Jadzia Dax is unconscious and is awoken by a gentleman who we later find out is Chris Brenner. And she's separated from Captain Sisko and from Bashir. Sisko and Bashir awaken, unfortunately, on the street, or are awakened on the street by 2 security guards, or basically homeless enforcement authority. The thing is that they're asked for their papers. And you notice that, like I said earlier in this particular video, that this takes place roughly 2 years from current events. Even now, there are places that you can't go if you don't have the proper documentation, or even law enforcement that will violate your civil rights by asking you for identification for being in public spaces. As a result of not having any form of identification or identification papers and having matching yet nicely looking pajamas on, they're promptly arrested by Vin and Calderon. Or as I should have said, Caldera. Cisco and Bashir are taken to District A's processing center, where they're introduced and processed to the social worker, Lee. Both Bashir and Cisco are processed as gimmies, giving their ration card, told about the ropes, and sent on their way. Now, on August 31st, 2024, Dr. Bashir gets into an altercation with Biddle, which results in a fight between Biddle, a couple of his ghost friends, Dr. Bashir, Cisco, and another individual who gets mortally wounded in the fight from Biddle, who we later find out is the actual Mr. Gabriel Bell himself. Now, as a result of this, the episode flashes forward to O'Brien and the rest of the Bridget crew, where they've been basically looking for answers as to where Cisco and his team ended up beaming to. They end up wanting to continue the investigation and end up wanting to inform Starfleet. But as they soon realize, there is no Starfleet, and the closest signals that they could pick up are from the Romulan Star Empire. Starfleet is no more. Back on August 31st, 2024, Cisco decides to maintain the timeline by taking on the identity of Mr. Bell, whose identification card he took off the ghost who had tried to rob him. Michael Webb, who's another influential gimme in District A, decides to join forces with Cisco and Bashir, most likely due to the assistance that Bashir gave his son earlier in the episode. After these events, Cisco tries to maintain the timeline as it should have unfolded. And as you know it, later that night on September 1st, events unfolded just as they should. A dim gets into a fight with a security guard, breaking out an all-out war. 6 hostages are taken. The 6 hostages are Van Caldera, Lee, and a couple of other individuals. Now, the thing about this particular situation is that in the original timeline, what made this event such a pivotal moment was that the National Guard went in thinking that the hostages had been killed by the hostage takers, yet they were not. And the thing is that a direct reason as to why the hostages weren't killed was because of the protection and actions of Gabriel Bale during that particular hostage situation. Now, September 2nd in this particular time altered timeline, Dax has formed a relationship with Mr. Chris Brenner. Now, Chris Brenner happens to be the owner operator of a really big news network, which is Channel 90. And upon investigation and talking with individuals at a particular party, Dax finds out that Cisco and team have the high degree of possibility of having been arrested and placed in one of these district areas. Now, she convinces, after she finds out that this is true, she ends up going back and convincing Chris to disobey the law and risk his license to broadcast what's going on in District A. Once we find out that they, and when I say they, the people of District A have gained access to the planetary computing system, or basically the internet, they begin recording messages that can get out to the public, because they figure that if they can just let the public know what's going on in the district, that the public outcry would be as such that they would have no choice but to close down the districts and other sanctuaries like this. Speaking of such, that was only one of 3 of their demands, which ended up being for them to find jobs for the individuals that are willing and able in these districts and sanctuary cities to, and when I say sanctuary cities, this is what I mean. These are sanctuary little cities within themselves. Jobs for these individuals who are willing and able to do them. All right, to reinstate the Federal Employment Act and to shut down sanctuaries, so that, because the conditions, although starting on a genuine note, they had degraded through neglect and underfunding and just apathetic overseers for such a degree of time, that it had no choice but to erupt and come to them. Eventually, the government ends up shutting down this particular connection and access that the hostage takers and the people of District A have gained to the planetary computing system. And just as before, on the morning of September 3rd at 0500 hours, the governor released the National Guard onto District A with orders to forcibly take back the district. In this timeline, when this happens, most of the hostage takers are killed. The only 2 survivors are Cisco, Bashir, and all of the hostages. During the breach, Cisco, who's impersonating Bale, saves Van's life, which is one of the head homeless enforcement officials. As a form of payment, after the situation is over, Van scolds the National Guard members, and him and Caldera escort Cisco, which is wounded from a gunshot wound to his left shoulder, and Bashir out of the processing center. In which case he lets him know, hey, basically I'd like to leave, and Vin thinks about it and decides to release them and use their identification badges as one of the many of the hundreds of dead District A members. Because when the National Guard members came in and took the district back by force, they did it a very botched job, killing hundreds of innocent civilians, mostly unarmed. Some kids, which we've seen injured kids even in the episode. As a result of these actions, Vin, in both timelines, chooses to expose the events of the National Guard raid and of the conditions of District A. Amongst the casualties were Michael Webb, Biddle Coleridge, Bill's friend who Bashir was impersonating, the rest of the hostage takers, Gabriel Bell himself, and hundreds more. So, as stated before, Star Trek has the tendency of not only forecasting technological advancements and the direction that technology can take us, whether good or bad in Star Trek canon, but also and equally the social directions that us as a civilization or society can take, good or bad. In this particular episode, it shines a light on how we as a civilization came to dealing with the homeless and the disenfranchised and the mentally ill or unstable and social outcasts. How we as a people decided to pass laws and regulations and directives towards removing these people from view and from our spaces, whether public, whether professional, or even residential, without examining the reasons as to why these people are in these situations. Deciding to invest more in hiding from view the situation than into changing the reasons as to why this problem exists. These things led to, as demonstrated in this particular episode, these particular districts, which resulted in a riot that people needed to finally see and experience to finally wake them up and understand that these things need to change. So, I like to end this particular episode with a question and two comments as to what I gathered from doing this particular video. And my first is a question. How did the hostage takers in the original historical timeline get their story out September 2nd if Dax wasn't there to gain a friendship with Mr. Chris Brennan of Channel 90? I just wanted to reiterate that Vin, the apathetic a-hole of a policeman, by the end of the episode had opened his eyes enough to whereas these events affected him in a way to where he told the story and the truth in the original timeline and told Cisco, which he thought was Bale at the time, that even without him asking that, he was going to do it anyway. That goes to show a lot about his character arc in this particular story. We also get to see or experience a little bit of Lee's background and why she ends up being the apathetic person she ends up being. I'm not going to give that away. I want you guys to check out the episode. And the last comment is, again, Chief O'Brien being the most important man in Starfleet history. Once again, he had 12 choices that he could have chosen, but only 4 or 5 actual abilities to transport to the right timeline. And on his last one, out of blue sheer luck, Chief O'Brien chose the right time, which led him to be able to save Cisco and team from being stuck in 2024. So, as always, thank you guys for watching the video. I hope it wasn't too long. I hope you guys learned a little bit about Star Trek fixed points, one of which being Gabriel Bell of the Bell Riots. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Ring the bell for any future content. And as always, peace, recycle, and say the whales. You guys be cool.